My name is Beatrix. I'm 67 years old, and I live alone in a small, weathered house on the outskirts of Bridgeport, Connecticut. My husband passed away more than 15 years ago. The boys were still young men back then, just starting their own families. And now, well, now they're grown, successful, busy, but I've become someone who mostly talks to the walls and the tea kettle. I used to work the machines at a canned food factory, the kind where your body gives out long before your paycheck does. My knees still creak from those long shifts, and my shoulders, God, my shoulders haven't been right since I turned 55. But I was proud of it, proud to come home covered in oil and tomato paste, proud to bring home money I earned with my own two hands. After I retired, the boys suggested I sell off most of the land their father and I had built our life on. "You don't need it anymore, Mom," Jason had said. "It'll help us get started. We'll take care of you." So I did. I sold 2 of the 3 parcels, the back orchard and the side field. I gave them each a fair share and kept just enough for myself, a tiny slice with this old house on it, the same one where I raised them both. In return, they promised to send me money every month, just a little, enough to make sure I wouldn't have to stretch my pension so thin. "You've done enough for us, Mom," they said. "Let us help you now." For the first couple of months, the money came on time, small amounts, but it helped. Then it started coming late, then it didn't come at all. When I asked, they always had reasons. "We're tight this month, Mom. You know how it is with the kids and the mortgage." I stopped asking. I cut back. I canceled cable, turned the thermostat down to 59, and stretched every dollar like a piece of brittle dough. I didn't complain. That's what mothers do. We understand, even when it hurts. But this Christmas, I wanted something different, not presents or fancy meals, just a little company, just a place at the table. I had no more groceries in the fridge, just 2 slices of ham and a jar of pickles. The house was cold, and the nights felt longer than usual. So I called a cab and rode the 30 minutes to Jason's house, holding tightly to my purse in the hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd be glad to see me. I didn't call ahead. I wanted it to be a surprise. The doorbell echoed too loud when I pressed it. My breath puffed out in the cold as I adjusted my scarf. Lights glowed from inside, and I could smell roasted turkey and cinnamon. My heart ached with anticipation. Jason opened the door with a frown. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "I wanted to surprise you," I said, smiling. "It's Christmas Eve. I thought I'd spend a few days with you all. I ran out of money for groceries this week, just until the pension comes in." He stepped back a little but didn't open the door any wider. "You should have called first. It was supposed to be a good surprise," I said quietly. "I don't want to be a bother. It's cold out here, sweetie. Could I come in?" Jason looked over his shoulder. I followed his. I gazed and caught a glimpse of my wife's parents sitting in the living room, smiling in matching reindeer sweaters. A Christmas tree twinkled in the corner, surrounded by perfectly wrapped presents. The dining table was set, silverware glinting, napkins folded into shapes. The air smelled like gravy and warm bread. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said. "My in-laws are already here. We don't have room." I blinked. "Not even a couch for a few nights?" "There's really no space," he said flatly. "It's already tight with the kids. Maybe you could try Andrew's place. He might have a spare room." He reached into his wallet, pulled out a bill and pressed it into my palm. "Here," he said. $50. Use it to get a cab. Let us know when you get there." I looked down at the money crumpled in my hand. My fingers curled around it out of habit, like I was still trying to hold on to something, dignity maybe. I didn't say anything. I didn't trust myself to. Jason didn't invite me in. He didn't even ask if I needed to use the bathroom or if I'd had dinner. Behind him, I saw my grandchildren at the table, laughing over gingerbread cookies. His wife's mother leaned forward to pour hot cider into a delicate porcelain cup. Me? I was just a shadow on the porch. I turned slowly and stepped away. The cold hit harder than before. Snowflakes caught in my lashes. My boots slipped a little on the icy pavement. I didn't look back, no goodbye, no Merry Christmas, Mom, just the sound of the door closing behind me. As I walked down the block, past glowing houses and inflatable Santas, the $50 bill felt like lead in my coat pocket. I didn't know where I was going, not really. I just knew I couldn't go home. Not yet, not like this. I had given that boy $50,000, helped him buy that house, painted the nursery when his first baby was on the way, held his wife's hand when she was in labor. And now? Now, there wasn't even room for me on the couch. He had space for his in-laws, for the Christmas feast, for the warm laughter that spilled out onto the snow-dusted lawn, but not for me. Not for the woman who had stitched his mittens by hand, who'd stayed up all night when he had the flu, who had worked double shifts so he could have new shoes for his first day of school. I was no longer family. I was an afterthought, a mistake on the doorstep. And as I disappeared into the falling snow, hunched over and small, I thought maybe it was my fault. Maybe I gave too much. Maybe I should have saved something for myself. But even as the wind bit through my scarf, even as tears threatened, I knew one thing with aching certainty. If I had to do it all again, every dollar, every sacrifice, I would. Because that's what mothers do. I didn't go home right away after Jason closed the door. Something in me couldn't quite face the silence of that old house just yet. Instead, I pulled my coat tighter around me and sat down on a bench near the corner store, where a plastic Santa blinked mechanically in the window. My fingers were stiff from the cold, but I still took out my phone and tapped. I dialed Andrew's number. No answer, just the familiar, dispassionate voice of voicemail asking me to leave a message. I didn't. I hung up and sat there a while longer, watching the breath rise from my mouth like fog. Then I made a decision, not bold, not impulsive, just quiet and tired. I would go see him anyway. The bus ride to New Haven took less than 20 minutes. The windows were fogged from the inside, and my reflection stared back at me, old, worn, a bit askew. I reached into my pocket and felt the crumpled $50 bill Jason had shoved into my hand. I didn't know why I was still holding on to it so tightly. Maybe because it was the only thing I was given that night, or maybe because some part of me wanted to believe it meant more than it did. I looked out at the town blurring past. Christmas lights blinked from porches and rooftops, and wreaths hung on every door. Somewhere, someone was baking cookies. Somewhere, children were laughing over wrapping paper and hot chocolate. But not for me. When the bus hissed to a stop, I stepped off slowly, one hand gripping my bag, the other still clenched around that bill. My knees ached from the cold. The sidewalks were slick, and the sky hung low, the gray of it pressing down like a thought too heavy to speak. Andrew's house was just a few blocks from the stop. His neighborhood was nice, modest but modern, all trimmed hedges and solar-powered snowmen blinking in sync. I remembered helping him with the down payment, wiring over the $15,000 without a word of hesitation. Back then, he'd hugged me so tight my ribs hurt. "You saved my dream, Mom," he said. Now I stood at his door, uncertain whether to knock once or twice. I chose twice. A few seconds later, it opened, and there he was. Andrew looked surprised, his eyebrows lifted in confusion. "Mom?" His voice held no warmth. Just confusion. "You didn't call." "I did," I said softly. "You didn't answer." He sighed and stepped aside, just barely enough to open the door wider. "You should have let me know. It's not a great time." I gave a tired smile. "I'm sorry, honey. I got sick last week, used up more than I thought on medicine. I was hoping I could stay a few days, just until the end of the month. I'll be gone before New Year." He didn't move. His face, always softer than Jason's, twisted into something harder now. "You're still strong, Mom. You could work. You can't just show up like this and expect to be taken care of. I've got the kids, the bills, and the house is already tight. Janine wouldn't be okay with it." I felt something in me crack, but I held my smile in place like a patch on old wallpaper. "I won't be a bother. Just tonight. It's Christmas Eve, sweetheart. Let me see the kids. I'll leave tomorrow." Andrew ran a hand through his hair and stepped outside, shutting the door behind him. The cold air whipped around us. "You've got a pension, don't you? Medicare? Why are you here asking for a handout?" His words didn't sting immediately. They landed slowly like snowflakes, soft at first, then heavy enough to collapse the roof of something I had quietly built inside me. I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. I couldn't tell him I'd spent most of that pension on blood pressure meds, on anti-inflammatory, on heating oil. I couldn't say that even breathing had started to feel expensive. I just thought maybe I could be here tonight. I managed almost a whisper. He shook his head, eyes darting toward the window. "We're not equipped for this, Mom. No one here has time to take care of you." There was not just a refusal, but a judgment. Not just a closed door, but a sentence. I was the burden now, the complication, the thing to be handled. I looked past him through the curtained window and saw a twinkling Christmas tree. I could hear the murmur of cartoons playing from inside. It was warm in there, laughter, dinner, and slippers, and here I was, $50 in my pocket and not even a welcome on my lips. I swallowed hard. "I'll go then," I said, though I couldn't feel my feet. "Sorry for dropping in." Andrew didn't stop me. He didn't ask if I needed help getting back. He didn't offer a coat or a ride or even a place to sit for a minute. He only said, "You should take care of yourself, Mom." As I turned to walk away, I felt his eyes on my back. Not with guilt or regret, just relief, like something uncomfortable had been removed from his day. The street was quiet, save for the crunch of my boots on frozen leaves. My shoulders curled in against the wind. The sky had turned the color of ash. Lights blinked from every window I passed, warm lights, golden lights, but none were meant for me. I didn't cry, not then. Something colder had settled into my bones, colder than the wind. It wasn't pain anymore. It was absence, the absence of everything I thought would always be there. Love, belonging, a place to sit down and rest my old bones at the end of a long, hard road. I passed a nativity set someone had placed in their front yard. Mary and Joseph huddled around a plastic baby, a family whole and glowing. I wanted to reach out and touch it, to borrow a little of that peace, but I didn't. I just kept walking. I don't remember how I got back to the bus stop. My hands were stiff, my legs ached. I sat on the bench and watched the cars pass. Inside them, people laughed, talked, sang along to radio jingles. The world was celebrating. I sat in silence. When the bus finally came, I climbed aboard without speaking. The driver didn't say a word either. I sat near the back, clutching my bag close, and let the hum of the engine drown out. The echo of my son's voice, "Mom, don't come here to leech." It rang again and again in my chest, like church bells that no longer brought comfort. By the time I reached Bridgeport, the snow had started again, soft and steady. I walked home slowly, the cold settling deeper into my joints, into the places that medicine no longer reached. And when I finally turned the key in my door, stepped into my little house, and sat down at the edge of my bed, I stared at the quiet, lifeless walls. I had 2 sons, 2 homes I'd helped build, and not one place left where I was wanted. I don't remember much of the walk back from Andrew's house, just the sound of my boots against frozen pavement, and the way the cold bit into my knees like old regrets come back to know. By the time I reached my house, my fingers were too stiff to fish the keys from my bag without fumbling. The porch light flickered as I unlocked the door, as if even the electricity inside had grown tired of waiting for me. Inside, the air was stale and cold, untouched for hours. I didn't bother turning on the heat. I didn't have the money for it, not really. The fridge buzzed softly in the kitchen, a low, lonely hum. I opened it out of habit, empty except for a half-full jar of mustard, 2 wrinkled apples, and a bowl of rice I'd stretched over 3 meals already. I closed the door quietly. Outside, the neighbor's house glowed like a Christmas card. Through their front window, I could see laughter bouncing off walls, light catching on shiny paper, children leaning into their grandparents' arms. The smell of roasted ham must have drifted in from under their door, rich and sweet and cruel. I stood at my own window, still wearing my coat. My hands clutched the back of the dining chair as I watched the silhouettes dancing behind those warm curtains. I whispered to myself, just a few more weeks. Pension comes in on the 5th. You'll make it. But something inside me sagged with those words. The quiet of the house wasn't peaceful. It was hollow, like I'd been erased. That night, I didn't sleep. My bed felt like a slab of stone. The pain in my left arm flared again, sharp and deep, like a screwdriver turning just beneath the bone. I had already taken the last pain pill earlier that afternoon, hoping it would last through the evening. It hadn't. I lay flat, staring at the cracked ceiling above the fluorescent light above my bed, flickering in and out, a dying gasp of yellow. My breath came in short, careful huffs. The ache spread from my wrist up to my shoulder, crawling into my back like cold water. Still, the tears didn't come for the pain. They came because I never thought I'd spend Christmas like this alone, aching in a house where no one would knock, no one would call, and no one would ask if I'd eaten. I turned onto my side, curling up against the chill. The blanket barely reached past my knees, but I clutched it close anyway. The room around me was quiet, save for the wind rattling the windows and the occasional whine of a distant siren. I closed my eyes, but the silence brought memories louder than anything I could bear. I remembered the Christmases long ago, before the boys had voices deeper than their fathers. I used to stay up late on Christmas Eve, wrapping little toys I bought with coupons and loose change. I'd use old newspaper as gift wrap, careful to fold the edges cleanly and slip them under their pillows while they slept. Jason once found a wooden car with one wheel missing. He thought Santa had run out of perfect ones. I told him even Santa likes to recycle. Those memories used to make me smile. Tonight they hurt. I saw myself standing in the break room of the cannery, rubbing my fingers together to get feeling back. We weren't allowed gloves near the conveyor belts. Too dangerous, they said. So I worked with bare hands, dipping cans into freezing brine, scrubbing down stainless steel counters until my skin split at the knuckles. 8-hour shifts that often turned into 10. Holidays didn't matter when the machines ran nonstop. There was one December when Jason begged for a computer. Everyone else in his class had one, he said. I worked double shifts for 3 weeks, stayed on my feet so long my ankles ballooned and my lower back locked up. I bought it secondhand from a guy at the flea market. Jason never knew. He just hugged me and cried, "Thank you, Mom. Thank you." And then there was Andrew, my baby, the soft one, the one who clung to my leg when I dropped him off at kindergarten and cried if I left early. He used to get bullied in middle school. I never told anyone, but I'd leave work early just to sit outside the school behind the chain-link fence, making sure he got to the bus without trouble. Sometimes he'd wave, sometimes he didn't see me, but I was always there. Always. Now both my sons had roofs over their heads, warm homes, loving wives, children who didn't even know my name, while I lay in the cold. Ribs pressing against a thin mattress, one heartbeat away from breaking in half. I sat up slowly and reached under my pillow. The prescription slip was still there, folded and worn at the edges. I stared at the dosage instructions, the tiny print smudged where I'd cried on it last week. I hadn't wanted to throw it out. Something about seeing my name printed on it made me feel real, like someone had once thought I mattered enough to help. My hands trembled as I placed it on the nightstand. It felt like setting down the last piece of evidence that I'd once been useful. I looked at my hands in the half-light, wrinkled and purple from poor circulation. These were the same hands that had wiped fever from little brows, folded laundry late at night, kneaded dough for birthday cakes I couldn't afford to buy. Now they were stiff, useless things, ghosts of the woman I used to be. I laid back down, this time on my side, facing the wall. The wind outside had picked up, whistling through the cracks in the siding. The house creaked like old bones. I didn't bother turning off the light. There didn't seem to be much difference anymore between day and night, between waking and not. What I longed for most wasn't comfort, it wasn't warmth. It was for someone to ask just once, "Are you all right, Mom?" But no one would. And somewhere in the deep quiet before dawn, as the sirens faded and the wind softened, my eyes finally closed, not in peace, but in surrender. And I slept, if you could call it that, beneath a ceiling that never blinked in a house where the only heartbeat left was my own, weak and waiting. I woke up the next morning with a dull ache in my legs and a deep, steady throb in my back that made even breathing felt heavy. My joints always complained after cold nights, but that morning the pain seemed to speak louder, like it wanted to remind me I was still here, still trying. I pulled the curtain aside and looked out through the frost-fogged window. Snow had covered everything, quiet, white, undisturbed. The rooftops, the mailboxes, even the sagging fence out back were tucked under a blanket that made the world look softer than it felt. But my hands curled in my lap still ached, and in my pocket I had only a few dollars left, singles mostly. Enough for a small bag of rice or a bus ride, not both. I sat there for a long time, letting the cold sink in through my sleeves. The silence in the house pressed around me like cotton in my ears, no clock ticking, no voices, not even a kettle humming. Just me and the sound of my breath against the window. Eventually, I stood up. My knees creaked as I moved across the room to the old armoire where I kept a tin box, one I hadn't opened in years. The hinges squeaked as I lifted the lid. Inside, neatly bundled and worn from time, were the tools of an older life: glue sticks, faded yarn, string, bits of fabric, a rusted pair of scissors, a small pouch of wooden beads. Things I used to use back at the factory for craft nights or community bazaars. I touched them like they were old friends. Not much, but still something. I whispered more to myself than to anyone else, "These hands still work. As long as I can create something, my life still has meaning." And that was that. No grand epiphany, no stirring music, just the quiet decision that I wouldn't waste away waiting for someone to remember me. If I was going to be alone, then I would survive alone with what little I had, with whatever I could make. I cleared the small wooden table in the corner of the living room, brushed away the dust with the sleeve of my sweater, and began sorting through the materials. I worked slowly at first, my fingers stiff and clumsy, but as the morning sun crawled across the floor, I found a rhythm, a wreath from bits of raffia and dried leaves, a bookmark from twine and buttons, tiny paper cards carefully glued and folded with shaky hands. By noon, the table was scattered with small trinkets. None of it was perfect. Some glue bled out at the edges, some ribbon refused to lie flat. But they were mine. They were real. The pain in my joints worsened by the hour, but I didn't stop. If I stopped, the silence would get too loud, the memories too sharp, so I kept my hands moving, one knot, one string, one bead. By dusk, I had a small box full. I wrapped each piece gently in newspaper cut from last month's ads and tucked them into an old canvas bag. Tomorrow, I told myself, tomorrow I'll go. That Saturday, I bundled up in 2 sweaters, an old rain jacket, and my thickest socks. I pulled a wool cap low over my ears and took the bus toward the Fairhaven Weekend Market, a strip of cement near the train station where people sold used tools, second-hand books, handmade soaps, immigrants, retirees, people like me. People with too much past and not enough present. I found a quiet corner near a rusted bike rack and laid out my goods on a piece of cloth: bookmarks, wreaths, keychains, holiday cards. I arranged them neatly, wiping off any smudges with the hem of my sleeve. At first, no one looked. A few people passed by, glancing down with polite disinterest. One man in a heavy coat actually laughed and muttered, "No one needs this kind of junk anymore." He didn't even slow down. I didn't respond. I just nodded gently as if agreeing with him and tried to smile. "It's okay," I whispered to myself. "Someone will stop. They will." But hour after hour passed, and still no one stopped. The sun rose higher, then began to sink behind the buildings. My feet were numb, my hands were so cold they shook when I tried to pour myself a cup of lukewarm tea from a thermos I'd packed. But I stayed, not because I thought I'd sell something, but because I needed to. Just as I began to pack up, a wind kicked up from the east. Then came the rain. It wasn't a gentle drizzle. It was the kind that slashed sideways and soaked everything in seconds. I scrambled to cover my goods with the plastic bags I'd brought, but they were too thin, too torn. The paper cards warped instantly, and the fabric ornaments sagged under the weight of the water. My body moved slow, too slow, and the wind whipped the cloth right off the ground. Half my display rolled into the gutter before I could catch it. I stood there, soaked to the bone, holding on to a small beaded bracelet, the only one that hadn't gotten ruined. It dangled from my fingers like the last thread holding my pride together. I didn't cry, but I felt the hot sting behind my eyes, the kind that burns even when your face is already cold. I sat down under the awning of an old florist shop, water dripping from my sleeves. My bag was soaked, the newspaper wrapping now pulp. I cradled that bracelet in my palm, the glue already starting to peel, and whispered, at least I didn't have to ask anyone for anything. And then, quietly, without a word, a woman appeared. She was older, maybe a few years my senior, with skin like rich mahogany and eyes kind but unreadable. I'd seen her before, selling knitted scarves 2 stalls down. She didn't speak, not because she didn't want to, but because she couldn't. She was mute. I'd heard the others mention it in passing. She looked at me, then reached into her own bag and pulled out a paper cup. She knelt slowly and placed it in my hands. Hot tea, jasmine, I think. She didn't say a word, but in that moment, it was the loudest act of kindness I had heard in months. I nodded, too stunned to speak, and clutched the cup to my chest like it was sacred. The heat of it traveled through my palms and up my arms, a warmth I hadn't known I'd needed. That night, I took the bus home in silence. My knees ached from the cold, my bag was dripping, and most of my crafts were ruined, but I didn't throw them away. I laid them out on the kitchen counter one by one and wiped them gently with an old dish towel. I peeled apart the cards, pressed them between heavy books to flatten, salvaged what I could. Not because I thought someone would buy them, but because I needed to believe tomorrow would come, and maybe, just maybe, it would come kinder than today. I went to bed with the smell of wet glue on my fingers and a towel wrapped around my feet. I didn't feel triumphant, but I didn't feel defeated either. Just tired and quietly, stubbornly still trying. Saturday morning came with skies still the color of wet ash, the kind of dull gray that made the snow on the sidewalks look more like dirt than beauty. I bundled up again, 2 sweaters this time, and headed for the Fair Haven market, clutching the damp canvas bag filled with the crafts that had survived last week's rain. My legs were sore, my back worse, but I kept whispering to myself, as long as I can sell a few things, it'll be enough for lunch. It wasn't hope exactly, more like stubbornness disguised as optimism. I found my same corner, laid down the old newspaper over the icy concrete, and began arranging what was left. A few bracelets, some keychains, and the greeting cards whose edges I dried overnight with an iron. My hands moved slower now, every knuckle aching from cold and arthritis. Still, I did my best to make it look like something worth stopping for. Just one customer, I whispered. One person, that's all it takes. For a while, nothing happened. People passed by, heads down, boots stomping through slush. Some glanced my way, but none paused. The city had grown callous with winter. I was adjusting a frayed ribbon on a paper ornament when I heard it, a heavy thud, sudden and sharp, followed by a gasp from someone nearby. I turned in time to see a man, mid-40s maybe, collapse onto the wet concrete a few stalls down. The sound was sickening. His body didn't crumple, it slammed like something already broken. People nearby froze. No one moved. He was face down, one leg twisted beneath him, blood seeping through the shoulder of his torn coat. His hair was matted and wild. His face, what little I could see, was pale, lips turning blue. 2 deep gashes near his left shoulder were still oozing, soaking through the fabric like blotting paper. Someone murmured, "Oh God." Another voice, sharper, said, "Don't touch him. You don't know what kind of trouble he's in." Then another, someone should call the cops, but no one did. They just stood there watching, arms crossed, feet shifting. No one knelt, no one leaned in. I didn't even think. My legs moved before my mind did. I rushed over and dropped to my knees beside him, the cold slicing through my jeans. "Sir," I said gently, shaking his uninjured shoulder, "are you okay?" No response, just shallow, ragged breathing, like each breath took more effort than the last. His eyelids fluttered, but didn't open. He wasn't unconscious, not fully, but he was slipping. "Sir," I tried again, "can you hear me?" Still nothing. I reached for my phone. My hands were shaking, but I dug through my purse, yanked it out, and pressed the power button. Nothing. Black screen. Battery dead. Panic welled in my chest. "Someone help me," I shouted, turning toward the circle of bystanders. "Please, he needs help. He's bleeding. He's not waking up." No one moved. A few people looked away. One woman pulled her child closer. Someone muttered, "Just leave it, lady," and then a soft creak of wheels behind me. I turned. It was her, the older Haitian woman who sold handmade greeting cards 2 stalls away, the one who never spoke a word because she couldn't, but was always present. She didn't say anything now either, just gave me a sharp nod and pushed her rolling cart closer, then gestured, "Help me lift him." I nodded back, breath catching in my throat. We worked together in silence, her stronger than she looked, me trembling from effort. The man was heavy and limp, but somehow between the two of us, we got him onto her cart. He groaned faintly, lips twitching. The clinic was 2 blocks away, tucked between a laundromat and an old pawn shop. I'd passed it 4 times and never gone in, but today it was the only place that mattered. We pushed him there, her guiding the cart, me holding his arm so he wouldn't slide off. Every crack in the pavement jolted him. I whispered to him the whole way, like I used to with my boys when they were sick. "Just a little longer. You're okay. We've got you." The receptionist at the clinic nearly fell out of her chair when she saw us. Within seconds, nurses came out with a stretcher. They took one look at him and rushed him inside. "He's lost a lot of blood," one of them said. "Looks like some kind of trauma to the shoulder and ribs. We'll stabilize him. You got him here just in time." Just in time. The words made my knees go weak. I sat down on the bench just outside the exam room, the cold metal seeping through my coat. My fingers were numb. 30 minutes passed, maybe more. Then the sirens. An ambulance pulled up. They transferred him onto a gurney, wrapped him in warming blankets, and wheeled him inside. One of the nurses paused by me. "You did good," she said softly. "Another 20 minutes and, well, he's lucky you found him." Lucky. That word stayed with me. I didn't leave. I sat on the bench outside the air doors, coat zipped to my chin, bag of soggy crafts still slung across my shoulder. Snow started to fall again, soft quiet flakes that melted as soon as they landed. For the first time in weeks, I felt something warm push through the fog inside me. Not pride, not joy, something older, deeper. The feeling of maturing, of stepping in when no one else would, of reaching out not because I was told to, but because I couldn't bear not to. The year had already turned. It was quiet outside, no more holiday songs on the radio, no more lights blinking on the neighbor's porch. The sidewalks were still wet from melted snow, and the sky hung low like a heavy lid. Raymond was still in the hospital. Day after day, I came and sat by his bed. He didn't talk much, sometimes he didn't open his eyes at all, but I stayed. I'd grown used to the soft beep of his monitors, the antiseptic smell, the silence. No one came for him, not once. I asked the nurse gently if any relatives had called. She shook her head and said, "No family listed, no visitors, no insurance." She hesitated before adding, "If no one pays the bill, we may have to transfer him out by next week." That evening I went home and stood alone in my small kitchen. The radiator rattled in the corner. My coat was still damp from the fog outside. I didn't turn on the TV. Instead, I opened the top drawer and pulled out a small wooden box, the one I hadn't touched in years. Inside, wrapped in a yellowed piece of cloth, was my wedding ring. It was dull now, a little bent on one side, but when I held it up, I saw Henry's initials, faint but still there. I ran my thumb across them slowly, like I used to. We had picked it out at a local jeweler in Bridgeport. He wanted something plain but strong, just like you, he had smiled. I sat at the table for a long while, staring at it in the weak kitchen light. My heart beat slowly, almost heavily. Then I stood up, got my coat, and walked out. I didn't cry when I handed the ring over at the pawn shop. I watched the man examine it, weigh it, scratch the surface with a metal pin. 16, he said flatly. I nodded. That's fine. The next morning, I handed the money to the woman at the hospital billing desk and asked if she could mark Raymond's account as paid. She looked surprised. Are you a relative? I shook my head. No, just someone who cares. Later that day, I returned to his room with a container of hot soup wrapped in a towel. When I walked in, he was awake, blinking slowly, trying to sit up. I helped adjust his pillow and placed the soup on the tray. You're still here, he said, his voice raspy. I told you I would be. His eyes welled up. Why? I sat down and folded my hands in my lap. Because I know what it feels like, I said quietly, to have no one. He didn't say anything for a while, just looked at me, then turned his face toward the window. 10 days later, Raymond was discharged. We stood outside the hospital together under a gray sky. He had a small paper bag in one hand, his coat still torn from that day at the market. He looked down at his shoes, then up at me. I don't want to be a burden, he said, but I don't know where else to go. You're not a burden, I answered. Come home with me. We'll figure it out. He hesitated, then he said softly, I've never had a mother who stayed, but if you don't mind, I'd like to think of you as one. I didn't speak. I just placed my hand on his shoulder and gave it a gentle squeeze. That was enough. Back at my house, I made up the small room down the hall, the one with the drafty window and the crooked lampshade. He said it was the nicest place he'd stayed in years. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of toast. Raymond was in the kitchen, struggling to open a jar of jam with one arm. I was trying to surprise you, he laughed. You did, I smiled. You didn't even burn it. We ate at the table together, with Lucky the cat curled between us. The snow outside had stopped, and a soft light filled the room. He helped with small things, repaired the window latch, fixed the loose tile in the bathroom, carried groceries when my knees ached. In the evenings, he would boil water for my foot soak or help wrap the heating pad around my shoulder. I owe you everything, he said one night while drying the dishes. No, I replied gently. We just found each other, that's all. I never asked him what happened before we met. I didn't need to. I could see the weight he carried, and I had enough of my own. Sometimes late at night, I would hear him coughing in the other room or talking softly in his sleep. I'd stand at the door for a moment, just listening, hand on the frame, heart heavy but also calm. Without even realizing it, I began calling him son. It slipped out one morning. Son, don't forget your scarf. It's freezing out there. He turned to look at me, eyes wide, but didn't say anything. Later that evening, as we were feeding Lucky, he murmured, Thanks, Mom. Just like that, as if the word had always belonged to us. I didn't correct him. I didn't flinch. I smiled. Sometimes family is not given. Sometimes it's chosen. In this quiet corner of winter, with 2 warm bowls of soup and a cat asleep on the floor, I found mine again. It was a gloomy February afternoon, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones and made the air in the house feel still and distant. I was sitting by the window, slowly working on a small embroidery project, tiny blue forget-me-nots stitched onto the corner of a pillowcase I'd meant to give away last Christmas. Raymond was outside watering the flower bed under the porch eaves, quietly humming an old tune I couldn't name. That's when I heard it. The tires, the crunch of gravel, a car pulling into the driveway. I froze, needle halfway through fabric. Something about the rhythm of the steps on the front path made my chest tighten. I peered out between the curtains and saw them, Jason and Andrew, both of them walking side by side up to my door with fake smiles stretched across their faces and a pink bakery box in hand. I hadn't heard from them since Christmas. I held my breath as I opened the door. "Mom," Jason said, grinning. "Look at you. We were just in the area. Thought we'd stop by. Brought your favorite pecan cinnamon rolls," Andrew added. "Thought it'd be nice to catch up. You know we've missed you." I didn't speak at first. My fingers curled around the doorknob tight. Those smiles didn't fool me, not after what happened. But I stepped aside and said, "Come in." They settled on the sofa like nothing had ever happened. Jason placed the bakery box on the coffee table, uninvited. I noticed Andrew scanning the room, his eyes briefly landing on the framed photo of me and Raymond from New Year's Eve next to a bowl of soup he had made. Then Jason pulled out his phone. "There's this real estate project going crazy in Guilford," he said, swiping through videos. "Pre-development stage. Everyone's getting in. You double your investment in 2 months easy." He looked up, still smiling, but his tone had changed, sharp. Andrew leaned in and lowered his voice as if we were conspiring. "Mom, all we need is to use the deed just for collateral. You're not even selling the house. It's just a short-term loan. I promise we'll pay it back next month." I didn't answer right away. My hands were resting on my lap, but my fingers had started to tremble. They really thought I'd forgotten how Jason turned me away in the snow, forgotten how Andrew told me not to eat for free in his house, forgotten that I had spent that night crying into a cold blanket in the dark with nothing but stale bread and unpaid bills. I stood up slowly, letting the silence weigh the room down. Before I could speak, Raymond walked in from the back porch holding a basket of fresh greens from the yard. His boots were still muddy from tending to the soil. His face was calm, unaware of the storm swirling in the room. Jason turned and sneered. Well, who's this? Some stray you picked up?" "What, Mom? Now you've got money to feed the homeless." His voice stung like vinegar on an old wound. I looked at my sons, grown men who once needed me to tie their shoes, wipe their noses, hold them when they had nightmares. Now they stood in my living room and dared to call the man who cared for me a leech. I had enough. "There will be no mortgage," I said, my voice low but steady. "What are you trying to do? Steal what little I have left?" "I am not the foolish woman you used to take advantage of." Jason's smile disappeared, his face twisted into something I barely recognized. "You forget yourself," he spat. "This house belonged to Dad. You're just squatting here." He took a step forward, towering over me, face flushed with anger. "Get the papers. I'm not asking again." I stepped back. My heart was pounding, my knees were weak, but my voice didn't waver. "Get out of my house." He didn't move, not until Raymond calmly stepped between us. He wasn't a large man, but the way he held himself, shoulders squared, chin up, made him seem taller. "She said no," Raymond said quietly. Jason looked at him, startled. For a second, the room went silent. Andrew stood up, visibly unsure, but Jason's eyes were blazing. "You've lost it," he hissed. "Letting a stranger tell you what to do? We're your sons." I said, "You were. Now get out before I call the police." Jason turned toward the door in a huff, Andrew following with a bitter look. As they reached the porch, Jason snapped without turning around, "Well done. You'll regret this soon enough." The door slammed behind them, and the room felt colder afterward, like they'd carried out all the warmth with them. But I didn't cry, I didn't collapse. I didn't feel small. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain aside, watching their car drive off. Raymond stood quietly nearby, not saying a word. I exhaled slowly and sat down. For the first time, I wasn't the one being left behind. I was the one who chose to stay. It was a quiet morning in early March. The sky was still gray from winter's grip, but the breeze was softer, kinder. I was sweeping leaves off the front porch bundled in my old wool cardigan when a black SUV rolled slowly up to the front gate, Its sleek shine looked out of place on our tired little street. I paused, resting the broom against the railing, and watched as a well-dressed man in a tailored suit stepped out. His shoes crunched softly against the gravel. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, bowing his head slightly. "I'm the estate manager for Mr. Raymond St. James. He sent me to collect you." I blinked for a moment. I thought I'd misheard. "Raymond?" I turned toward the front door just as he stepped outside, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He smiled at me, calm and warm like he always did, but something had changed. There was a confidence in his eyes I hadn't seen before. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner," he said gently. "I wasn't just a driver. I used to own a long-haul trucking company, St. James Freight Lines." My breath caught in my throat. My mind scrambled to catch up. He stepped closer, his voice low and steady. "I lost everything when I was attacked in an alley in New Jersey. Some punks thought I had cash on me. I was stabbed in the side and left to die." His fingers brushed the edge of his shirt near the old scars beneath. "I called for help, but no one stopped. No one until you." I remembered it now, his body collapsing in front of the market, the blood soaking into the sidewalk, my hands trembling as I lifted his head. That basket of crafts I had to leave behind. I had no idea that moment would change both our lives. "You pushed that cart with me all the way to the clinic," he said. "If you hadn't, I wouldn't be here." I felt tears sting my eyes. He continued more softly, "I survived, but I didn't want to go back to the boardrooms and meetings. I didn't want that life anymore. When I saw you, your hands, your voice, the way you spoke to me, I thought of my mother. He passed away when I was 16, and I thought maybe I could stay, take care of you instead." I couldn't speak. I just reached out and touched his arm, and he placed his hand over mine. After a long pause, he asked, "Would you like to teach your sons a lesson?" I shook my head slowly. "No, a mother can't hate her children, but she can choose not to let them hurt her again." He nodded, then with a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, said, "There's somewhere I want to take you." Later that afternoon, he brought me to a small coastal town, Milford. We drove through winding streets, past rows of hydrangeas just beginning to bloom, until we reached a modest but beautiful villa near the sea. White shutters, a garden out front, and a wide porch with rocking chairs. "This is yours," Raymond said simply, "if you'll stay." I couldn't speak. My knees felt weak. I gripped the iron rail as the salt air hit my face. It smelled like beginnings. I didn't ask questions. I just nodded and stepped inside. Weeks passed. Life slowed to a gentle rhythm. Morning, afternoon walks. Lucky the cat curled at my feet. I tended to the garden while Raymond read the newspaper out loud in his low, steady voice. Then one morning, the bell rang. I peeked from behind the curtain and saw them, Jason and Andrew, standing on the other side of the gate. Their faces weren't angry anymore, just desperate. Maybe they got my address from one of the neighbors. The Guilford project had collapsed. I'd heard bad investments, unpaid loans. They were back to nothing. "Is Mom here?" Jason asked the guard. "Please, we just want to talk." I stood behind the curtain, frozen. My heart didn't leap the way it used to. It ached quietly like an old bruise. The security guard, polite but firm, replied, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Beatrix is not receiving visitors." Jason opened his mouth to argue. Andrew said something I couldn't hear, but I didn't move. I stayed hidden behind the lace curtain and watched them walk away. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even satisfaction. It was simply peace. Later that day, I sat out on the porch with a blanket over my knees. Raymond was in the kitchen making tea, humming an old tune as the kettle whistled. Lucky lay sprawled in the sun, one paw twitching in his sleep. For the first time in years, I felt safe, not just from the cold, not just from the hunger or loneliness, but safe from the weight of ungrateful children, safe from the silence that used to wrap itself around my bed at night. Raymond stepped outside with 2 cups of tea, mint and chamomile, he said, just like yesterday. I smiled as we sipped. I looked out toward the sea and thought, this is not where I thought I'd be at 70, but perhaps this is exactly where I was meant to end up. Because family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about kindness, about the people who show up when no one else does, about second chances offered without being asked. What did you think of Beatrix's story? What would have happened if she never met Raymond and had to face her sons alone when they came for her last home? I'd truly love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. This story is a reminder for every mother, father, and aging soul. Protect yourself, protect what you have. Don't depend too deeply on anyone, not even your own children. And sometimes love comes not from blood, but from the strangers who choose to care. It also reminds us that kindness still matters and it still exists, just like Beatrix. When you do what's right, life has a way of bringing goodness back to you, and those who are ungrateful eventually pay a price. Thank you for staying with me through today's story. If you believe that every mother, every grandmother deserves to be seen, to be valued, and to be loved, please consider supporting forgotten mothers by hitting subscribe, sharing this video with someone who needs it, and leaving a comment below. Because sometimes a single comment is enough to remind someone they're not alone.